If you follow independent animation, or independent video games, or both, you are having quite the week right now. Something just ended that a lot of people have been invested in for a long time, and something else is about to drop that a lot of people have been waiting on for even longer. I'm not going to name them because this applies to everything that drops on the internet. But the timing is particularly useful, because right now, you can watch the failure modes play out in the wild. You can now see what it looks like when people who have been emotionally invested in something for years finally get the conclusion, or the next chapter, or the thing they've been theorizing about, and then immediately begin producing takes that have almost nothing to do with the work and almost everything to do with their prior relationship to the work. This is what the video is about. This video is about the behavior of fandoms that emerges every single time something significant drops, and the baseline competencies that would prevent most of it if people bothered to develop them. We will go through them. Decouple your emotional response from your analysis. These are two separate things. They feel like one thing, they are not one thing. Your emotional response to a piece of media is real. It happened. You felt what you felt. That is not in question. What is in question is what that response actually tells you. And the answer is that it tells you about you, your history with the franchise, your relationship with the creator, your expectations going in, the mood you were in when you sat down to watch it, the thing the work accidentally reminds you of, the ending you wanted and didn't get, or the ending you feared and received. This is useful information about yourself. It is not, however, information about the quality of the work. The fact that something moved you does not make it profound. The fact that something left you cold does not make it poorly constructed. These are not the same axis. Emotional impact and craft quality are related but distinct variables, and conflating them produces bad analysis every single time. What you are supposed to do, what this is asking you to do, is to note your emotional response, acknowledge it, and then perform a separate and deliberate inquiry into the work itself. What is actually happening here? Is it being done well, on its own terms, by its own standards? That second inquiry is what criticism is. It is difficult. It is a skill. The first thing, your own feeling of the work, is simply the starting point. It is not the conclusion. If you cannot perform that separation, everything downstream from here is unreliable. You're not actually analyzing the work. You are processing your feelings about the work and then reporting on those feelings as though they constitute analysis. They do not. The people you are attached to are not real. Neither of them. There are two categories here, and they are both worth addressing because they produce the same failure mode from two different directions. The first is the creator, Toby Fox, Gooseworks, Andrew Hussey, even. Whoever made the thing you are currently forming opinions about. You have followed their work. You have read their newsletters and their tweets and their development updates. You feel like you know them. You do not. What you have is a model of them, a construction built from their public output over time. That model may be accurate in some respects. It is not the person, and your feelings about the model are not evidence about the actual work. The second is the characters, and this is the one that produces some of the most spectacular failures of media criticism you will encounter online. Fictional characters are not real people. This seems obvious. It is apparently not obvious because a significant proportion of media discourse treats fictional characters as though they are real people who made real choices that should be evaluated on real moral grounds. They cannot. A fictional character does not make choices. A writer made choices about what a fictional character would do in service of a narrative. Those are craft decisions. The correct question when a character does something is not, why would they do that, as though that you are evaluating the behavior of a person you know, but what is this doing? What narrative function does this serve? What thematic argument is this advancing? What is the work trying to accomplish by having the character behave this way? You are allowed to feel attachment to fictional characters. That attachment is one of the things good storytelling produces and is not a failure on your part. What is a failure is treating that attachment as a baseline for analysis, being genuinely angry at a character for choices the narrative gave them, judging them by the standards you would appeal to a real human being making real decisions with real consequences. They are story devices. Evaluate them as story devices. Distinguish your taste from quality. This is a distinction that a surprising amount of people never make explicitly, which means they spend their entire engagement with media collapsing two separate claims into one without noticing. The first claim is that you did not enjoy this. That is a statement about your subjective experience. It requires no justification beyond the fact that you had the experience. It is inherently true if you say it is. The second claim is that this is bad. That is a claim about the work. It requires justification. It requires you to articulate standards, demonstrate that the work failed to meet them, and account for the possibility that your reading of the work is incomplete or mistaken. These two claims are frequently true simultaneously. They are also frequently not. You can dislike things that are excellent. You can love things that are mediocre. The enjoyment and quality are related variables, but they are not the same variable. What this step is asking you to do is to know, before you open your mouth or touch a keyboard, which of those two claims you are actually making about a work, because they require completely different levels of justification and lead to completely different kinds of conversations. The problem is that most people are making the first claim and then presenting it as the second. Identify what something is trying to do before you evaluate how well it does it. This should not need to be said. It apparently needs to be said. You cannot evaluate execution in a vacuum. Execution is always execution of something. A particular goal, a particular effect, a particular set of genre conventions, or deliberate subversion of those conventions. Without understanding what the work is attempting, you have no basis for determining whether it succeeded or failed. A slow mediative narrative is not failing because it isn't fast. A horror story is not failing because it isn't funny. A comedy that doesn't make you personally laugh might still be doing exactly what it's set out to do for an audience that is simply not you. The question is not, did this work produce the experience I wanted? The question is, what experience was this work designed to produce, and did it produce those experiences competently? Those are different questions. The first one tells you about your preferences. The second one tells you about the actual work. Understand the intent, and then evaluate the execution. In that order, not the other way around. Learn to distinguish a flaw from a choice that you disagree with. A flaw is when a work fails on its own terms. A choice you disagree with is when a work succeeds on its own terms and you wanted it to do something else. These are categorically different things, and treating them as equivalent is one of the most common errors in casual media criticism. It produces arguments that sound like criticism, but are structurally just expressions of preference dressed in the vocabulary of analysis. A narrative decision can be deliberate, internally consistent, thematically coherent, well executed, and clearly intentional, and you can still dislike it. That is a completely legitimate response. What it is not is a flaw. A flaw requires the work to have failed at something it was trying to do. Personal disagreement with a creative decision does not constitute failure. When you call something a flaw, you are making a specific and falsifiable claim about the relationship between the work's intentions and executions. That requires you to have done the work of understanding the intentions. If you have not done that work, you are not identifying flaws. You are identifying preferences and calling them failures. Those are different things. Check your sample size before you make claims about what other people think. The loudest voices in any online community are not a representative sample of that community. The loudest voices in any fandom are not a representative sample of that fandom. the loudest voices on any platform are not a representative sample for the audience of any given work. This is not a subtle point. This is simply a straightforward observation about how online discourse works. People who feel strongly post. People who feel neutrally or positively and are satisfied do not post at the same rate. The result is a visible distribution of opinion that is systematically skewed towards the extreme negative, because negative and disappointed reactions generate more posting behavior than positive or satisfied ones. A trending topic is not a majority opinion. It is evidence that a significant number of people had a strong enough reaction to generate engagement. That is all it is. 5 people in your timeline are not the community. A vocal faction in a subreddit or a Twitter are not the fan base. Before you make any claim about what audiences think, what the consensus is, what people are saying, establish how many people you've actually heard from and whether they constitute a meaningful sample of anything. The answer is usually no. Steelman the thing you're criticizing before you criticize it. The steelman is the strongest possible version of the argument or creative decision you disagree with. The most charitable, most coherent, most internally consistent reading of why the work made the choices it made. The best case for the defense. If you cannot construct that version, if you cannot articulate why someone who is smart, thoughtful, and operating in good faith might have made the decisions the work made, you are not ready to criticize it. You have not engaged with it seriously enough to have earned the critique. This is not about being nice. This is not about giving everything the benefit of the doubt. It is about intellectual rigor. Real criticism engages with the actual thing at its best and then makes the argument for why it still falls short. Criticism that only works against a weakened or uncharitable version of the work is not doing anything useful. It is confirming a conclusion you already had first without actually testing it. Steelman your argument first before then critiquing it. In that order. Understand that knowing what happens is not the same as understanding what it means. Spoilers are plot information. Analysis is not plot information. These are different categories, and confusing them produces a particular kind of discourse that sounds like engagement with a work while actually being a summary of events dressed up as interpretation. The ending of a piece of media is not its meaning. What happens in the final episode is not what the show is about. The sequence of events in a narrative is the skeleton. The meaning, the thing that the criticism is supposed to illuminate, lives in of the pacing, the tone, the accumulation of detail across the full runtime, the craft decisions that make a particular moment land or fail to land, the relationship between what the work shows you and what it withholds. When you say you know what something is about because you read a summary, or had the plot described to you, or watched a highlight reel of significant moments, or watched somebody else critique the media and you passively absorb it while you are doing what you are actually wanting to do, what you have is the skeleton, someone else's opinion. You do not have the actual thing, and the thing is what actually matters. Plot summary is not criticism. Knowing what happens is not analysis. This should not need to be stated, and yet it apparently needs to be stated. Hold your first take loosely. Your immediate reaction to a piece of media is a data point. It is not a conclusion. It is contaminated by expectation. What you were hoping for, what you were afraid of, what the discourse around the work told you to anticipate, what your prior relationship with the franchise/creator primed you to feel. It is also contaminated by the conditions under which you consumed it, whether you were tired or distracted, or if you went in with a chip on your shoulder because of something that happened in the fandom 2 weeks ago. None of this makes your immediate reaction worthless, it simply makes it preliminary. It is a starting point for further inquiry, not a settled verdict. The takes that age well are almost never the ones posted within the first hour. The takes that age poorly are almost always the ones delivered with the most confidence in the shortest time after release. Sit with your take, come back to it, Ask yourself in 2 days whether your reading of the work has changed, and if so, why? That process, the revision, the reconsideration, is what criticism actually looks like. The immediate reaction is just the raw material, the ore before the ingot. And ask yourself what it would take to change your mind. This is the diagnostic question. This is the one that tells you whether you are doing analysis or just performing a position. If you engage with a piece of media, form an opinion, and then cannot identify any argument, any evidence, any reading of the work that would cause you to update that opinion, even partially, even slightly, then your opinion is not a critical position. It is a defensive position. You are not analyzing the work. You are protecting a conclusion you arrived at before you do the analysis, or one that is entangled with your identity, your community, your prior relationship to the franchise/creator. Real analysis is falsifiable. It can be challenged. It can be revised in a light of a more careful reading, a compelling counter-argument, a piece of context you did not have. If yours can't be, if you have already decided and no argument could move you, that is worth knowing about yourself. That does not mean you are doing criticism. What it actually means is that you're doing something else. Expose yourself to more media. Not more of the same media, more media, broadly, across genres, across mediums, across traditions you did not grow up with and do not instinctively love. Media literacy is a muscle. It is built through volume and range. Thorough exposure to enough different things that you develop an actual comparative baseline, a sense of what is conventional and what is innovative, what is derivative and what it is derived from, what is exceptional and what is merely competent, what is a genre expectation and what is a genuine creative choice. If your entire media diet is one genre of one medium, if you have spent the last 5 years exclusively consuming indie RPGs or exclusively prestige cinema, you do not have that baseline. You have a deep familiarity with a narrow tradition. That is not the same thing. The hippie sports fan analogy is useful here. You know the type, right? They show up 4 years for the World Cup, they have very strong opinions, very confident delivery, and yet has never watched a full season of regular club football in their life. They do not know how tactics work. They do not know the history. They do not have the reference points to know what they are looking at when they are looking at it. A lot of people engaging with media right now are that person. The passion is genuine, yet the foundation is not there. You cannot identify innovation without a baseline for convention. You cannot recognize what something is doing differently without knowing what it would look like if it were doing the same thing as everyone else. You cannot evaluate craft without having seen enough examples of craft, good and bad, to know what it looks like. The work is the watching, the reading, the witnessing, the listening. There is no shortcut. Read more, watch more, play more, video and real life, across traditions that are unfamiliar to you, across things that you are not sure you will enjoy, across mediums that you have not prioritized. That is how the muscle gets built. There is no other way. Discourse is going to happen regardless. People are going to have opinions. People are going to post those opinions. People are going to present preliminary reactions as settled verdicts, personal preferences as objective failures, emotional responses as analytical conclusions, parasocial attachment to creators as insight into the work, and emotional bonds with fictional characters as a basis for moral judgment of narrative decisions. This is going to happen. It always happens. The question is whether you are going to be one of those people. These are 11 steps. None of them are complicated. All of them are, in practice, apparently optional for a significant portion of the people who consider themselves engaged media consumers. Decouple your feeling from analysis. Understand that neither the creator or the characters or people you actually know the difference between taste and quality, etc., etc. This is the floor, guys. And if you cannot get through the floor, I have a remediation for you. It starts with Blue's Clues, has Sesame Street, Arthur, etc. Build the muscle of media literacy before you spout takes about it. Because if you cannot do these extremely simple things, you cannot call yourself media literate.